afternoon, and thank you very much everyone for this privilege that I've been given to address you all today and to focus on the hope and the normality that you have all given my family and the millions of families who are affected by diseases that in the future have the possibility of being eradicated on account of stem cell research. So this is Harry fella. He is my very beautiful son, and he's just turned 7, and in answer to what you are all thinking, yes, his mother is very beautiful. So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about the power and the value of research to challenge definitions. So in effect, due to stem cell science and genetic developments, there are treatments on the very near horizon that were only a dream a decade ago. Treatments that will mean an entirely different trajectory and lifestyle for adults and children like my son across the globe. We were given Harry's diagnosis in 2014, 2.5 years after his birth, actually on Rare Diseases Day. We were ushered into a small room in the Murdoch Children's Research Institute just up the road from here, and by the looks on the faces of the geneticists and the counsellor, we didn't need to be told that our son had read positive to a genome sequencing test for Usher syndrome. Usher syndrome used to be termed deaf blindness, and as you can imagine, that is a pretty devastating diagnosis. Harry has the form of the syndrome known as Usher type 1F, which affects under 4,000 people in the world. Usher syndrome probably affects up to 400,000 individuals in all of its forms directly, and millions of people overall if you consider the mothers, the fathers, the brothers and the sisters, and the carers for those who have this rare syndrome. Harry's form is one of the rarest of this rare syndrome. Back then, we were aware that there was only one other family who had a child with the same condition in Australia, and only one group in Iowa, at the University of Iowa, conducting research. A quick word on the deafness aspect of Usher syndrome, as it's key to the whole concept of redefining definitions. So science and research and medical application to what is now an everyday treatment has caused congenital deafness to have an effective treatment that would have been unthinkable a few years ago. My son, who was born deaf, can hear and speak perfectly well, and I do mean perfectly well, thanks to the cochlear implant, also known as the bionic ear. He had this implanted in Melbourne, where this device was created, when he was 9 months old in March 2012, and his day of switch on, i.e. the first day that he ever heard sound, was the 15th of March that year, which was my 41st birthday. Now, he composes his own songs in his little Lego corner at home. Songs about wanting to travel business class to London. And I'm not sure where he could have got that one from. But thanks to external electronic upgrades, his hearing is getting better annually. Hearing in noisy environments is now the norm, whereas 6 months ago this was a major problem. Hearing in wind and hearing music are now also the norm, whereas no time ago they were not. Definitions of what is possible change each month now. Soon, the cochlear implant will be fully internal, and kinetic energy will charge the electronics involved. So today that's defined as soon. Soon, it will be the complete norm, and soon, today, could mean 3, 4, 5, 10 years. But once momentum builds and proof of concept happens, 10 so easily can become 5, and again, the redefinition of what is possible. So, if you ask me, in essence, that is what this conference, this stem cell conference, is all about. Redefining the impossible. So while the cochlear implant fundamentally challenged the definition of deafness, his potential vision loss was another matter. We have worked tirelessly over the last 2 years to connect, over the last 3 years to connect with other families and researchers globally to understand the ramifications of what Harry was burdened with. And what we could do to try to alter that prognosis. Everything we did was a stepping stone to the next meeting, the next introduction, and providing us with more information on the power of scientific research to discover a cure or halting mechanism for the deteriorating eye disease that will leave him without sight as an adult. A trip to Boston for a global symposium for families with Usher syndrome led us and one other family to create a support network for all families in Australia with children under 21 diagnosed with Usher syndrome. Usher Kids Australia's mission to diagnose early, educate clinicians and support families has formed a community which started with 2 and now has 29 families. Support is a lifeline for families. We speak from experience on that. But it doesn't fund research or even get researchers interested in an orphan disease. We knew we needed a different approach, and this is where stem cells and stem cell research comes in. So back in 2014, Harry had skin cells taken from his arm by the team at the Centre for Eye Research Australia here in Melbourne to take back to their lab and create them into their original pluripotent form. Thereafter, these stem cells have been grown into photoreceptors, the cells affected in Harry's condition. I still find it unbelievable that my boy's photoreceptors have been grown from his skin cells and are in a laboratory near where I'm standing now, near where we all are now. Everyone we mention this to sees, as do I, that the world of science fiction is very real indeed. Growing photoreceptors and modelling how the cells of the eye interact in a laboratory dish means that experimental work can be safely conducted on them. The researchers can learn more about the condition, and we can reach the goal of proof of concept for a form of gene therapy that may overcome the genetic cause of Harry's condition and lay the foundation for a therapeutic trial, something we could not have imagined when we received that diagnosis. When we tell anyone this part of the story, their eyes widen and they shuffle in their seat. From a layman's perspective, it means that the world of tomorrow, your world, is happening today, and the proof of its benefits show that this is the future which nothing can stop. And so, with the support of key researchers and scientists at the Centre for Eye Research Australia, we have set up a non-profit foundation called Genetic Cures Australia to take on the task of providing research-led clinical trials for Australian patients with inherited eye diseases. If the cochlear implant could be created in Australia, which has enabled deaf people to hear perfectly well, we could cure blindness in Australia too. Today, we have ongoing work to treat this orphan disease in Iowa, in Oregon, in Boston, in Baltimore, in Oxford, in Paris, in California, in Hobart, and here in Melbourne. And that's just what I know about. As a non-scientist, but a concerned father, there will be many more. So we're all working on this together. We're building our community. The single thing that is most gratifying is offering genuine hope to newly diagnosed individuals and family. Genuine hope, and from a place that we know is so true. The only speculation is redefining how long the word eventually means. So thank you all for that. This would simply be impossible without everything you and your armies are doing. After the initial terrible diagnosis and prognosis, my wife and I devoted all of our time to trying to understand Usher syndrome, where the science was, what it had to offer, and how we could help to push things along. And the more we learned, the more we engaged, with the more important work that you all do, the more we came to see that Harry's story is far from appalling, but in fact a frankly beautiful story. It is a story about a beautiful boy and how thousands of individuals are working collaboratively across the world to discover and develop the knowledge and tools needed to help Harry to live a long life seeing, enjoying, and interacting with the world. The more my wife Holly and I have engaged in this story, the more we understand that this is about new definitions. First and foremost, it is about defining what is possible. Hypothetical becomes redefined as proof of concept, which then becomes clinical benefit, and then implementation. Eventual becomes in the next few years. These are the changing terms that mark progress away from silence and darkness and towards hearing and sight, sound and light. Now we are entering the era of curing inherited blindness, thanks to your work. This has moved from being a theoretical possibility eventually to being a practical possibility soon. Perhaps now is the time to start thinking of a new term for Usher syndrome. If you are not deaf, and if you can see, if you don't have symptoms, then you no longer have a syndrome. Usher syndrome can now be described as something which is imminently treatable, and my son and other kids of his generation will benefit enormously from stem cell research, genetic developments, and medical innovations, which all of your work is opening up and was only dreamt of a few years ago. The point is that we have momentum, as does everything that has been discussed here over the past 3 days. And we have seen this over the course of this conference, time and again. Each month brings more researchers, producing more science and more political and public commitment to backing further progress and translating the fruits of science into meaningful outcomes for those with inherited syndromes and their families. Momentum builds momentum, and this is so key for the millions of individuals and families in our position. We are very, very grateful to you all for your work, and this is a sincere and long overdue thank you to you all. Harry represents many thousands of children whose lives began with an appalling probability. A beautiful child, this beautiful boy you see here before you today, is born deaf and will become blind after the few years he has been afforded to see the world around him, albeit in silence. Now, we know with great certainty that neither the deafness nor the blindness are incurable inevitabilities. So that's the end of my speech, but this speech is not finished. It's the women and the men in this room who are going to finish this speech. We all know we're at the threshold of changing the world for the vastly better and forever. So this 10-minute chat from me is a thank you to you all for your dedication and your commitment to redefining the impossible. Thank you very much.